I want to inspire, um, these young students to know that there's so much out there. There's so much that they can do, and they can also, effectively come up with their own voice, and they can express themselves using this marvelous universal language of music. So that's really,
Mm.
I want to share what inspired me, because when I encountered that at their age, it really changed my life. I was like, well, this is what I want to do. I feel like, if I dedicate myself to this, as much of a struggle as it has been, and as it may be, I'll be able to offer the best gift that I can as a human being.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the New York Jazz Workshop in Conversation interview series. I am your host, CJ Shearn, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about the summer teen program that I did uh, a couple of weeks ago with Eli. And we have one of the faculty that will be teaching at this program in July. This is Andy Bianco, New York Jazz Workshop faculty. He's played with Deborah Cox, Candace Springs, Ray Chu, Ellie Varner, Bob Moses, George Burton, and many others. He's toured at the uh, he's toured everywhere as a member of the Empire production, which I believe is that the same as the TV show or different?
No, no, I did. That was a sort of like an avant-garde Cirque du Soleil type of theater. It was a
Aha.
theater show, yeah, and that was
Okay.
something that I toured New Zealand and Japan with
Oh,
a little
gotcha.
while back.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it. And you were also a finalist in the 2012 and 2015 USA Songwriting competitions. And you also have an album out on Outside In Music, which came out, I believe, last year called NYC Stories, which is a killing record.
thank you, thank you. I'm very excited about it.
Cool. So, if you could, Andy, just talk to me a little bit about your background and jazz education and what you would like to impart to kids and teens in this program coming up this summer.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much, CJ. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the New York Jazz Workshop. New York Jazz Workshop is a great organization run by great people who are fantastic musicians and composers, and thoroughly dedicated, passionate about jazz education. Um, my background, coming from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, my father was a professional musician for most of his life. He played saxophone, clarinet, um, and he played professionally in dance bands and sort of ballroom dance orchestras, and a little bit of symphonic ensembles for the majority of his life. He was also an English teacher at my high school in my hometown of Mount Lebanon, just a suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he also started the first jazz ensemble at the school there. So my dad, in addition to being a professional musician um, his whole life, he was also his main. I mean, he went to college to become a teacher, and he was really one of the first people. He came from a large Italian American middle class family, and he was one of the first people in his family that got advanced degrees. He had a master's degree, so that was very important to him, his generation. And music was just something that he always did since he was a kid, and he always made money doing it ever since he performed professionally from when he was 12 to when he was 45, and then he became a teacher. So education and music were very important to him, and being a professional musician, and he instilled that in me. And when I was young, I think from the ages of 6 to 8, if I recall, I played a little bit of piano. And when I was a kid growing up, my dad would always be blasting these Count Basie records, and Les Brown. And he loved the big bands, especially Count Basie. And he loved the alto sound of Johnny Hodges.
Mm,
And he would be
yes.
playing that when I was very young. So my first experiences, and then my mother, she would play Pavarotti and she would play opera. My first experiences of music as a little kid were sort of running around, dancing around my living room in the summertime. My dad would be blasting Count Basie on the 8 track. And, when I became, my dad sort of retired from music when he was around 45 because he was by then making enough money as a high school teacher that he didn't have to supplement his teaching income with music. Because initially, for the unions, sort of came into being, teachers made very little money. And thankfully for the unions, my dad was able to eventually earn a decent living doing that. But so he sort of retired uh, from playing professional saxophone and clarinet. But he always loved to hang out at music stores, and he always loved to, um, you know, sort of buy and trade instruments. And when I was about 13, 12 or 13, he started getting into playing the guitar just as a hobby. And he would always be buying and exchanging and trading these different guitars. So they would be around the house, and I just started to play them. And at the time, a lot of my friends were getting into guitar related music. Around the time, this was in the 90s, the alternative rock scene, the Seattle rock scene was big, and it's getting a lot of people, a lot of young people like myself into playing guitar. All my friends, were playing guitar when I was, around 13. So, for Christmas, I was able to get a used guitar, and actually a used amplifier from a friend of my older sister who sold it. And was also a student. This guy was also a student of my father's. So I was able to get a guitar and start taking lessons. And I had a guitar class in my high school, and it was funny because the teacher was teaching us these little classical pieces, but all we wanted to learn was Nirvana or Metallica or Soundgarden. So
Yeah.
it was very cool. It was a very interesting time period, and I just stuck with the guitar, and I learned to play by ear, and I would always play along to things. And then I gradually got into classic rock music, and then the blues, and I would sort of learn to play that by ear, and more sort of jam bandy stuff. And then one summer evening when I was around, I would say 14 or 15, my dad had a Bill Mays trio, strangely enough, great jazz musician. He had a jazz record, and I took it upstairs and I put it on my CD player and I tried to play along to it. I couldn't hear my way through the song. I was like, oh, this is strange. Normally I can figure what it is and I can solo along to it. And I
Hmm.
couldn't do that. And that's when I realized, oh, this is jazz. There's more complex stuff going on here. So I started studying jazz, and then I went on to study with a great uh, local jazz guitar legend in Pittsburgh named Joe Negri, who's coming out of the same school as Charlie Christian and Django Reinhardt and Joe
Mm.
Pass and Cal Farlow. Yeah, and he still is performing actively in Pittsburgh today. He's in his 90s. He plays marvelous. He's like the Joe Pass or the Cal Farlow of Pittsburgh. He's a marvelous player. I started
Wow.
studying with him when I was a senior year in high school, and I also played in the jazz ensemble that my dad had started years before. And I participated in some different, student all-star jazz big bands and got some scholarships. And then I went on to go to music school at University of Pittsburgh, continued to study under Nathan Davis and his phenomenal pit jazz program. And then I got a scholarship to Berklee College of Music a couple of years after that. Went there, got my degree there, did some teaching there. Also, actually, dealing with high school age kids for the summer guitar sessions 3 years in a row. And then that's sort of kind of my upbringing. And then sort of the rest is history. Went on to begin my professional career after that.
Wow. That your father in particular, and he sounds like a phenomenal person, having come up in the tradition of playing in dance bands and ballrooms, and also really loving Count Basie. I grew up on Count Basie as well. I mean, Count
Oh,
Basie was
great.
just incredible. I mean, for me, a record was On the Road. Are you familiar with that album? It was on Pablo.
So was that where they were doing Neil Hefti arrangements? Was that with Sonny Payne on drums?
No, no, this was the late 70s. It was recorded at Montreux.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah, yeah. So that was, I kind of grew up on the sort of New Testament basy stuff. But
Great.
also, thank you. Yeah, your father also branched out to being an English teacher, because it sounds like with the wages and everything that he was being paid with the union and gigs, it sounded like the English teaching job was more comfortable. But the fact that he established an educational base in your area, I think, is very important, because, and we could use this to segue into the teen program. Um, Jazz education is something that is really needed to keep the music going forward, because jazz is very much, um, it's almost like a oral tradition in a way. I also go to Lenny White's Zoom chats on Friday nights, and
It's fantastic.
yeah, we talk a lot about the lineage of jazz, and how, in terms of the African tradition, it goes
Yep.
back in a certain way. And I feel like with musicians such as yourself, you respect that tradition, but you also move it forward. Like on NYC Stories, there's a lot of intriguing compositions. Um, Mag Lev Rays is a beautiful ballad. Um, and
Thank you.
Sure, Ballad for Mallards showcases that sort of Joe Pass, Tal Farlow, guitar tradition. I feel like some of the other tracks had a very sort of angular, I guess more in your tone as opposed to ideas. I felt like there was more of a Kurt Rosenwinkel kind of.
Sure. I
Um,
mean, he's a huge, and especially coming, being in New York and coming from Berkeley and coming up in this generation, he's a huge influence as a modern. He's a huge modern influence on my playing, and
right.
also someone that I cite is someone who's done a tremendous job at really assimilating the depth of language of the older players with a new modern sound and approach. So
Yeah.
effectively, really doing what Dizzy has taught us that we're all really meant to do, and which I try to do in my stories and on all of my endeavors is to have one foot in the past and one foot in the future.
Right, right. And the future is, still being written. And I feel like,
Yep.
as a writer about jazz, I feel like the future and the present, a lot of critics today have an issue with it. I feel, and there's a very, I call it the linear historical jazz narrative. Like, it's just very A to B, and it doesn't count, certain things like, um, I don't think. I mean, there's some musicians I've talked to who haven't really acknowledged the fact that there's new drum innovations past Tony Williams and Elvin
Absolutely.
Jones, and it's happening. Um, I think, because another thing that comes from the African tradition is that when there's a tribe and there's a master, the master's not replaced, and they're still considered the master. And I think in a lot of ways that also kind of, in a weird way, prevents more innovations from happening, because we it's fine to look up to our idols and heroes. I do it all the time in this music, but we also have to look forward. Like, for example, for guitar, one of my big favorites unabashedly is Pat Metheny. I mean,
Of
pat
course.
Pat is doing things. If you've heard his new record, he's Road to the Sun. It's classical composition. It's absolutely it's just another level,
Yeah.
um,
Everything that he does, CJ, it's just like he's been on the cutting edge and the forefront of the language of jazz guitar since Bright Size Life, and frankly, even before that. And he's just
yeah.
always been, he's really a groundbreaking innovator, and
Right.
I mean,
John
he's,
Schofield and Bill Frisell as well.
Oh,
John
absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, Schofield is really one of my personal favorites, and also John Abercrombie tremendously. For the
Oh yeah.
newer sort of school, there's just so many, and like Pat and John Schofield as well. They really inspired, especially them being Berkeley guys. They really inspired a whole generation of guitar players to really focus on, obviously studying the master, studying the lineage, studying the history, but really ultimately doing that towards the end of, developing your own sound or striving to develop your own sound, whether it's through your compositions or your
Right.
improvisation or your tone or
Right.
your use of,
Right.
approach. And also to sort of instantiate that
Hmm.
as a composer. And that's one thing that that's a real gift, Matheny and Schofield, especially Matheny, I would say, to the modern generation. And I remember when I was at Berkeley, I had, I was really encouraged to, if I'm working on new concepts, new ideas, superimposing new ideas over standard song forms, I was really encouraged, write a tune using these ideas, write a contrafact on a standard set of changes, and then you
Right.
kind of like, it's like you're kind of not freezing, but you're putting it in fixed form. You're making it this composition, and then you're also kind of taking more ownership over this idea, and you're helping to develop the idea both in time and in out of time. So yes, I totally.
Hmm.
I mean, Matheny is, I would say, as influential to the new school and Schofield
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
new school as Django Reinhardt and Charlie Christian were to the first school, and I would argue as Wes Montgomery and Joe Pass were to sort of the middle type school.
And I feel that Kurt Rosenwinkel is part of the school after Schofield, Matheny, McLaughlin, and
Absolutely.
then it remains to be seen. It's going to be exciting where that goes because I love how, especially with people of our generation, I mean, jazz has always been about sort of bringing what you love into it, pop songs, whatever, but it's
Yep.
as acceptable now to play a Nirvana tune as it is a Radiohead tune as it is a if you like a Mary J. Blige tune or a Beyonce tune or vice versa, or with hip
Absolutely.
hop you can do whatever you like, and that's so great. So with that in mind, and we go back to the education, what would you like to impart to the kids and the teenagers in this program this summer?
Well, I mean, in terms of this sort of age group that we're working with, and I've had quite a bit of experience with this group, and I have an affinity for it just because it reminds me, it's very nostalgic for me because I remember when I was in high school and I first started, I remember I attended a jazz camp 2 years in a row at Kane University in Pittsburgh when I was
Hmm. Hmm.
16 and 17. And then before I went to Berklee School of Music, I attended a guitar sessions program there. And so when I was a teenager, and this is when I was trying to learn my way around jazz, because as I said, a few years before I came to this sort of, I hit a wall where I realized, wow, I can play the blues, I can play all this rock stuff, and I can hear my way through most song forms, but I can't hear this advanced harmony of jazz. So,
Hmm.
when I was a teenager and taking these summer camps, it really, really really blew my mind wide open to the possibilities of music and creativity and artistry. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget the first time that I heard the great guitars when I was 17 at the Duquesne University um, summer guitar and bass workshop. And I remember I heard the great Sal Farlow, who I've been actually on a kick lately transcribing and posting some of his solos because he's a marvelous innovator. I sort of think of him as in the next evolutionary step after Charlie Christian. If you hear him with the Red
Right.
Norvo trio in 1950 with Mingus and Red Norvo, marvelous playing. And I remember seeing him at 17. He was, towards the end of his life. And I saw him, I saw Herb Ellis, and I saw Charlie Bird play and I had a 1954 Epiphone Zephyr guitar that had been refinished, and I was able to get it for fairly affordable price. and I had all three of them sign it, and that was it was almost kind of like that. I thought it was sort of their blessing to
Yeah.
me, and it was just a magical experience. And I remember when I was 17, the same year, but a little bit before, my dad took me to see the great Ken Burrell play with Roger Humphreys and Dwayne Dolphin, two elder statesmen of the Pittsburgh jazz scene, and it was just a magical experience. And I want to try to share that love, spread that magic to this younger generation, and inspire
Mm,
them, to search for a higher level of truth and a higher level of meaning. And that's one of the great gifts of this music, and this is something that I feel when I transcribe and when I talk about and when I teach transcribing and studying and listening, when you listen to someone great or someone especially who you think is the greatest, like a Wes Montgomery or like you said, a
hmm
Pat Metheny or a Tal Farlow, and you try
hmm
to emulate them and study them, you get an essence of that greatness and that beauty. And it's a call to aspire to your highest form of self. And I think really spread the most value that you can in the world. And so the first point is, I would say, CJ, is I want to inspire um, these young students to know that there's so much out there. There's so much that they can do, and they can also effectively come up with their own voice, and they can express themselves using this marvelous universal language of music. So that's really,
mm,
I want to share what inspired me, because when I encountered that at their age, it really changed my life. I was like, well, this is what I want to do. I feel like, if I dedicate myself to this, as much of a struggle as it has been and as it may be, I'll be able to offer the best gift that I can as a human being, to ease the pain and suffering of the world. And I want to share that with them ultimately. Then the
right.
other, so that's sort of the first thing that I want to do, and then I try to do. And then the other more practical thing is to get them all familiar with the processes that they can routinely apply, which will help them progress quickly and effectively, and teach them how to manage their time. A really big thing for me when I was young, and a lot of young people I find are like this, is I didn't know how to practice and I didn't know how to manage my time. But now
Right.
I do, and I know exactly how to teach it.
Yeah.
So that's the second sort of practical
You mentioned how you not only saw the the great guitars, which had a lot of Concord albums out, but
thing. Yeah.
Kenny Burrell. Kenny Burrell is, to me, he's actually, besides George Benson, he's the first guitar player that I ever heard growing up. Because I grew up with a lot of Jimmy Smith records, and
Oh, love it.
I heard Kenny Burrell when I was like 2, 3 years old.
Yeah,
And
that's great. The sermon and house party, those records.
yeah, oh, what, Andy? How you read my mind? How
Oh,
did you know?
I love that. That's one of the first Kenny Burrell solos I think I ever learned, and I remember like that was like an epiphany. Like listening to that sort of helped me figure out how to play over those when they do
Yeah.
confirmation, and oh, amazing. Love
Oh
that
yeah,
record.
the sermon, house party, home
Oh,
cooking,
yeah.
six views of the blues, at the organ, volume 1 and 2. You know, the one with All Day Long and Yardbird Suite, and that was the first session with Art Blakey and Jimmy Smith.
Oh, so
Um,
swinging, so swinging.
yeah, Kenny was absolutely is a master, and I hope he's doing all right after that news that we heard a few years ago.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That was
where
that was kind of rattling, to hear that.
it was, and then the circumstances surrounding the crowdfunding for him, which I donated to that too. It, like, the
Yeah. So
circumstances
did I. I did as well. Yeah.
was it was very, very strange, but all these players or masters, Grant Green also, I love Grant Green.
Love Grant.
um I like we're talking about organ guitar players. I really like Eddie McFadden as well. He was
Yeah, he's kind of an unsung hero. Yeah, I mean,
Philly, yeah.
real, yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, Philly. I mean, Philly's just
Yeah.
incredible what comes out of Philadelphia. And Grant. Grant's another one. Like for me, and this is in terms of easing your way into, because a lot of young students, they're intimidated by obviously, the canon of jazz guitar, but Grant and Kenny, and again, I think it was Duke Ellington that referred to Kenny Burrell as one of the most lyrical guitar
Yeah.
players. And
Oh
if
yeah.
you have Duke Ellington saying positive stuff about you, I mean, enough said. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
Grant and Kenny, and the thing is, one thing that I find is that there are some modern players that kind of sleep on Grant and Kenny because they don't have the chops that a Pat Martino or a Benson
Right.
have. But the thing
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
they over like Kenny, his lyricism, his melodicism. And the thing is, for younger players that are intimidated, I was intimidated hearing Joe Pass and Wes Montgomery and Pat Martino. But Kenny kind of eases you in and is basically, it's sort of like his playing is saying, oh, it's not about how fast you can play or the size of your biceps on the guitar. It's about
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
how melodic you can be. You want to tell a story, you want to sing a song. So, like, when I was listening to the Sermon and House Party, those records, I was like listening a ton to Kenny, and that gave me the confidence to dive in myself. And then I started copying some of his stuff, and he was also a big influence on another influence of mine, Jimmy Ponder from Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah. Jimmy
Kenny
Ponder.
Burrell was an influence on Jimmy. And
Mm,
Grant was a huge influence on me too for the same reason, because in a lot of my intermediate students, I tell them, Grant's language, it's more accessible because it's less technical. So you can
right.
transcribe it easier. He has a lot of motifs and ideas that he uses a lot that you can sort of integrate fairly quickly. So Grant is a huge player for me. And the other thing is, a lot of players sleep on Grant because they don't realize, you know, he has a very strong connection to the African lineage, in my opinion, because of his use of triplets, his use
Mm-hmm.
of long form motivic development, and his very sort of articulated hard sound where he digs in. It's
Yeah.
staccato, he's digging,
Right.
and that's a
Right.
connection to the blues. It's a connection to the percussive African field. So the thing is, Grant is very deep, and a lot of people, they overlook how impactful he is because he doesn't have the chops that a Joe Pass or a Benson has or a Pat Martino.
Yeah.
But
I
those,
mean,
yeah, those two. I'm glad you mentioned them. I don't want to go on. I could go on for weeks about those two.
yeah,
They're
we could talk
monumental.
about this for hours, but I think we've been in for like 20, 30 minutes. We should try to wrap this up soon. But Grant
Sure.
Green, a solo that I would recommend for a lot of people who are studying at the New York Jazz Workshop, a solo worth hearing of Grant's where you talk about the motivic development and the ideas. His solo on Workout by Hank Mobley.
Yeah, that's a great solo. That's a great record.
Yeah,
So
because
swinging.
he plays this lick on the turnaround through every chorus. And I've read people on jazz forums sort of complain that he's like repeating himself and it's a boring solo, but no, in terms of what you're talking about, the motivic development and looking at the triplets and all of that, that
Yes.
that solo is it.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's such a hip. It's such a sophisticated approach. Now, granted, I mean, in terms of like a real Titan, like, I recognize that, the argument. Some people say, perhaps, okay, Grant is not a real powerhouse Titan like a West who could do everything, or maybe a Joe
yeah,
Pass, but he's a very unique figure, and jazz is really about an individual voice and uniqueness to me. I
right,
mean,
right.
Andrew Hill might not be a Herbie Hancock or a Chick Corea. Herbie Nichols might not be a Wynton Kelly or a Red Garland, but both of those players are equally important, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you said it. I feel like you know, even at Berkeley and places like that, I mean, I never studied theory there or anything, but I feel like instead of just focusing on the heavyweights, you also need to focus on, say, let's talk about drummers like Joe Dukes or Donald Bailey, who were great on feel and stuff like that, because
Yeah,
you couldn't just focus on chops.
right.
Antonio Sanchez, who is an incredible drummer and also a very good friend of mine, he always talks about don't don't really use your solos to blow chops. You have to, form melodic patterns and everything. And that applies to the guitar too, because, you know, as great as Al Di Meola is, I get tired of that. I mean, it's just notes after notes after notes. I mean, you can make that argument about Pat Martino too, but Pat Martino, there's a lot of feelings just with somebody like Al. I've never really felt much, and the only Al that I really like is like with Return to Forever. But
Sure, sure.
you make a very
Yeah,
good
that's
point.
some of my favorite Al too. Sure.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so is there any way that if people want to reach you on the web that they can? I know you have a page on Outside In Music, which is where I read the blurb from.
Yes, I do. And so I'm on Facebook, Andy Bianco Music, also on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Andy Bianco. And I have my website is artistecard.com/Andy Bianco. That's sort of a transitional website. I'm revamping my
Mm,
main website, but
okay.
there's a contact form, and you can find out where I'm playing and find out all information about what I'm doing. The other thing is, just in terms of, if I may, CJ, I'd like to talk briefly just about my father's memorial scholarship. My
Yes, the
father
Philip
passed
Bianco
away
Memorial Scholarship.
exactly, and so this is a scholarship that we set up, my family and I set up after my father passed away in 2018. It's hosted by the Keynotes Foundation in Pittsburgh, and they have a scholarship competition, and it awards $1,100 annually
Mm-hmm.
um, to the winner of this competition, and it's geared towards students of music that want to pursue their music, at the college level and professionally. And actually, currently, right now, I do these Facebook birthday fundraisers. I recently had a birthday, and I use that as a way to, annually sort of generate money. And actually, right now, this is sort of the last day. Our goal is $2,000. It's on Facebook now,
Mm,
and we've raised 83% of the goal, and this is the last day of it. So we raised $1,652. And I just like to say thank you to all the people that donated. It's my hope to keep this funded for right now. In the past couple of years, we've raised close to $12,000, so it's funded for at least a decade. But the other
that's
thing is, in
fantastic.
lieu of the COVID pandemic, there's definitely there's definitely more need for funding for the arts and music in general. So I'm very happy about that. And if anyone is interested, they can contribute to that through the Keynotes Foundation, and also uh, you know online with this through my Facebook fundraiser,
Mm,
which is just going on today. But this is
awesome.
something that our first winner was actually a senior at the high school that I went to, Alexis Schulte Albert, and she was a classical bassist and a 2019 Mount Lebanon High School grad, and now she's a classical music student at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which
Wow.
coincidentally is where my father got his bachelor's degree. So um, I like to do this in his memory, and I really believe in giving back to the community, CJ. As I said, when I was coming up, and when I was of this similar age, kind of just coming into my adulthood, I benefit. I mean, I was helped out by different scholarships and different programs. It's very important for me, even though I no longer live in Pittsburgh, to
Mm,
give back to that community and ensure that the opportunities that I had when I was growing up will be there, and I want to make those opportunities greater for
right,
everyone.
right. Wow, that's really amazing, and I just know that when you teach the class for the teens this summer, that it's going to be a wonderful experience. And we will also connect. I will connect with you on Facebook and Instagram. So everybody, I hope that you enjoyed this particular interview. I will be coming back in the next couple of weeks with interviews with the other faculty who will be teaching. And for the New York Jazz Workshop interview series, I'm CJ Shearn. Peace, love, groove, and keep swinging, everybody. My thanks to Andy Bianco for his wonderful time, his generous uh, time with me in the midst
Thank you,
of what's
CJ.
going on right now. Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so much.
everyone.